While the flamboyant Texas billionaire has not yet been charged with a crime, the FBI is now investigating what SEC officials label a massive ongoing fraud.
We're going to discuss the conviction of Alan Standford, a Texas-born businessman and investor who was convicted in 2012 on 13 of 14 fraud-related charges. Standford was sentenced to 110 years in prison, despite his attorneys asking for a maximum of 44 months.
Federal judge in Houston has sentenced fallen Texas tycoon R. Alan Standford to 110 years in prison. Prosecutors had asked for twice that amount for stealing more than $7 billion from investors over 2 decades. It's been described as one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in the nation's history.
June 18, 2009 was the date that began the fall of the once beloved billionaire as he was taken into custody by FBI agents.
Charges against Standford will be unsealed today when he appears in court in Virginia. Standford was taken into custody by the FBI late last night at his girlfriend's apartment in Fredericksburg, Virginia, after a Houston grand jury.
On June 25, 2009, Standford appeared in a Houston court and pleaded not guilty to charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Alan Standford was convicted on March 6, 2012, after a 6-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, on 13 of 14 counts in his indictment. Standford was found guilty of orchestrating a massive Ponzi scheme. For 20 years, Alan Standford lured investors to buy certificates of deposit in his offshore Standford International Bank with the promises of high returns. But the investments were a scam. Instead of investors' money going towards business purposes, Standford used the money from new investors to pay off old investors and finance his lavish lifestyle. A lifestyle which included a 112-foot yacht and support vessels, 6 private planes, and gambling trips to Las Vegas. In one 3-year period, Standford spent $100 million on aircraft, which included helicopters and private Learjets. He even spent $12 million lengthening his yacht by just 6 feet. Standford's illicit scheme fell apart when nervous investors tried to withdraw their money. There was no money in their accounts, with Standford having skimmed off over $2 billion of investors' money into his personal bank accounts. According to FBI agent Robert Martin, who testified in front of jurors at Standford criminal fraud trial, Alan Standford blew $1.1 million at the Bellagio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas and gave another $1 million in cash to family members, including his wife and girlfriend, 4 weeks before regulators seized Standford's operation on suspicion it was a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. Standford also spent $20 million on yachts, $37 million promoting cricket tournaments, $333 million on a pair of startup Caribbean Airlines, and another $379 million to underwrite his Standford Group company. FBI agent Martin also testified in court that Standford business record revealed Standford directed $418 million of investors' money to Standford Development Company, his real estate development firm, and $350 million to his venture capital unit. Martin said through an array of other speculative ventures, Standford blew through an additional $486 million borrowed from CD depositors. In court, one of Standford's victims, Angela Shaw, told the judge, "Alan Standford has stolen more than billions of dollars. He took our lives as we knew them." She said some 28,000 people had lost money in the scam. At the time of Standford's conviction in 2012, approximately 18,000 of his 28,000 customers had not recovered their money. Standford was required to pay a judgment of $5.9 billion to the victim of his crime. Among those affected by Standford's elaborate Ponzi scheme were 7 Major League Baseball stars: Greg Maddux, Johnny Damon, Bernie Williams, J.D. Drew, Andre Jones, Jay Bell, and Carlos Pena. After his early business ventures ended in failure, he founded Standford Financial Group in 1991 in Antigua, laying the foundation of his empire and also becoming the island's largest employer. Standford was a large influence in Antigua. He developed much of the land, started a newspaper, a cricket stadium, and employed many people. Alan Standford was knighted by the Antiguan government in 2006 and began utilizing the title Sir. But following his arrest and trial, his knighthood was stripped in 2010. Therefore, he can legally only go by his given name. Standford is currently serving his 110-year prison sentence at Coleman's 2 USP, a high-security federal prison in Sumter, Florida, and is ineligible for release until the year 2103.